Hello everyone, welcome to the first lesson of IGCSE Physics ATP paper crash course. Students, before we jump into the lesson, let me first quickly tell you two very important things about the ATP paper. The grade threshold for an A grade in this paper and the structure of the paper. Students, ATP paper is a 40 marks paper and you'll be surprised to know that the average grade threshold for an A grade in this paper is only about 26, which means that if you are given an ATP paper of every difficulty level, then you can lose about 14 marks out of 40 and still expect to get an A in it. But students, you must also note that you cannot always get an A grade in this paper by scoring about 26 marks in it, because the grade threshold for any grade actually depends on the difficulty level of the paper. So 26 is actually the grade threshold for an A grade in an ATP paper of every difficulty level. However, for a relatively easy paper, the grade threshold for an A grade is usually higher than 26, and similarly, for a relatively difficult paper, the grade threshold for an A grade is usually lower than 26. Students, you might also find it surprising that the lowest grade threshold for an A grade in the ATP paper in the past 10 years has been as low as 19, which is even less than 50% of the total marks. And on the other hand, the highest grade threshold for an A grade in the ATP paper in the past 10 years has been as high as 31, which is close to 80% of the total marks. Okay, students, let's look at the structure of the ATP paper now. Students, in the past, the IGCSE Physics ATP paper consisted of 5 questions, but it now consists of 4 questions. The first 3 questions are usually for 11 marks each. These questions are relatively easy, but the last question, question 4, which is referred to as the planning question, is considered to be the most difficult question in the paper by most of the students. But the good thing about the planning question is that it's only for 7 marks. So even if you mess up the planning question, you can still secure an A grade in your paper. Students, it's also important to know that the ATP paper questions are usually on these 6 topics only: oscillations, equilibrium and general physics, spring extension and Hooke's law, cooling rate and thermal insulators, light and electricity. Now students, note that not all of these topics are equally important. For example, these 3 topics are more important than these 3 topics. I'm saying this because if you go through several ATP past papers randomly, you will almost always find in every ATP paper one question on cooling rate and thermal insulators, one question on light, and one question on electricity. And this is not the case with these 3 topics.